16 months after I buried my husband, my doctor found something in my blood that had no business being there. She said it quietly, the way doctors say things they have been preparing to say since before you walked into the room. She had the results on the screen in front of her, and she turned the monitor toward me and pointed at a line of numbers and said that this particular compound does not occur naturally in the human body, and that the levels indicated in my results suggested exposure over an extended period. Not an accident. Not an environmental factor. Not something I had taken knowingly. Someone had been putting it there. She asked me when my symptoms had begun. I told her approximately 2 years ago, the fatigue, the confusion, the mornings when I could not locate words I had known for decades, the afternoons when the room tilted slightly and then righted itself before I could be certain it had moved at all. She nodded slowly. 2 years ago Thomas was still alive. 2 years ago Thomas was still coming home every evening by 6:30 and making dinner on the nights I said I was too tired and telling me I was working too hard and suggesting, gently, that perhaps I should see someone about the fatigue. He had suggested the doctor himself. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 62 years old and I live in Connecticut. Thomas was my husband for 38 years. He died 16 months ago, cardiac arrest, a Tuesday morning in February, a closed casket at the funeral, because of the condition he was found in. In the months since I have learned many things about the man I was married to. I did not expect to learn this. If this story stays with you, please subscribe and leave me a comment below. Tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what was in my blood. I have always been a healthy woman. Not in the performative way of someone who makes health a personality. I did not run marathons or follow particular diets, or maintain the kind of rigorous wellness routine that requires scheduling. I simply had the quiet good fortune of a body that worked reliably, that recovered from illness without drama, that carried me through decades of ordinary life without requiring significant attention. My mother had been the same way. Strong constitution, she called it, with the particular pride of a woman from a generation that considered physical resilience a form of character. She had worked until she was 72, and walked 2 miles every morning until the year she died. I had inherited her bones and her blood pressure, and her general indifference to physical complaint. So when the fatigue began, I did not immediately recognize it as fatigue. I recognized it as age, as the natural adjustment of a body entering its 7th decade, as the reasonable consequence of a difficult year, Thomas's retirement, the change in our routines, the particular stress of having a husband suddenly present in a house that had been organized around his absence during working hours for 35 years. I told myself I was adjusting. I told myself the tiredness was situational and would resolve. It did not resolve. Thomas and I had built our life on Birchwood Lane over 3 decades in the particular incremental way of people who are too busy living to notice that they are also building. The house had accumulated the evidence of our years together the way houses do. In the kitchen that still had the original cabinets we had always meant to replace. In the garden that Thomas had never been interested in and that I had maintained with moderate enthusiasm and no particular skill. In the spare bedroom that had been Lucas's room, and then a guest room, and then a storage room, and then, in the final years, Simply the room where things went when we didn't know where else to put them. Thomas had retired at 64. I had retired from teaching 3 years earlier, at 61, after 30 years in secondary school classrooms that I had loved genuinely and left with genuine grief. Retirement had been an adjustment for both of us, but differently. I had found my way into new routines relatively quickly, reading, correspondence, the book club I had joined, and then come to depend on the slow accumulation of a life structured around choice rather than obligation. Thomas had struggled more. Or appeared to. He took long drives. He was quieter than he had been. He reorganized the study twice, and then left it in a configuration I didn't find logical, but didn't question. He suggested, with the gentle attentiveness he had always brought to my well-being, that I should be eating better, sleeping more, reducing stress. He made appointments for me. He accompanied me to them. I had understood this as care. I understand it differently now. The first symptom I noticed clearly was the word retrieval. I had spent 30 years as an English teacher. Language was not merely my profession, but my primary relationship with the world. I thought in sentences, noticed the architecture of other people's speech, had opinions about word choice the way some people have opinions about music. Words had never failed me. Then they began to. Not dramatically. Not in the way of illness that announces itself. In the small humiliating way of a woman reaching for a word she has used 10,000 times and finding the space where it should be temporarily empty. A student's name. The title of a book I had taught for 20 years. The word for the thing on the table, the ordinary kitchen thing, the thing you used to, and then Thomas would supply it, gently, without drawing attention to the gap, and I would feel a flush of something between gratitude and alarm. I mentioned it to my doctor at my annual checkup. She ordered blood work. The results came back within normal ranges. She said it was common at my age. She said stress was a significant factor. She asked about my sleep. I told her I had been sleeping more than usual actually. 9 hours some nights, occasionally 10, and waking unrefreshed. She noted this. She suggested iron supplementation, which Thomas had already suggested, and which he had already, thoughtfully, purchased and placed on my side of the bathroom counter. I took the supplements. Nothing changed. The afternoon tilting began in the spring of the year before Thomas died. I was standing in the kitchen making tea when the room moved. Not dramatically, not the lurching displacement of a fall or a faint. A gentle shift, like the house had settled on its foundation, like the floor had briefly reminded itself that it was resting on earth. I held the counter. The kettle boiled. The moment passed. I told Thomas that evening. He was immediately and thoroughly concerned, not dramatically, not in a way that alarmed me, but with the focused attention of a man taking the information seriously. He wanted me to call the doctor first thing in the morning. He researched symptoms on his laptop while I watched television and reported back, quietly, that balance disturbances in women my age could indicate several things, most of them minor, some worth investigating. He drove me to the appointment. He sat in the waiting room and stood when I came out and asked how it went with a hand on my arm and eyes that were entirely present. The doctor found nothing alarming. Inner ear, possibly. Stress, possibly. She suggested I reduce caffeine and increase water intake and return in 6 weeks if the episodes continued. They continued. Thomas continued to be attentive. He made sure I was drinking enough water. He prepared dinner more often than before, saying he wanted to make sure I was eating properly while my body sorted itself out. He was home more, which I attributed to concern, and which meant he was also the person most frequently present when I needed something and couldn't locate the word for it, or when the room shifted and I needed the counter. He was always there. I understood that as love. By autumn of that year I had developed a pattern that frightened me more than the individual symptoms had. I would wake at 7 feeling as though I had not slept. I would move through the morning with a heaviness that was not ordinary tiredness, not the tiredness of a poor night or an early alarm, but something thicker. Something that sat behind my eyes and slowed my thinking and made the simplest decisions require more effort than they should have. By early afternoon I would sometimes feel marginally more alert, enough to read or correspond or sit in the garden for an hour. By evening I was exhausted again in a way that sent me to bed earlier and earlier. Thomas observed all of this. He tracked it, he said, because he was worried. He had a notebook, I saw it once, on the kitchen counter, with dates and brief notations. He said he was keeping a record in case the doctors needed it. In case there was a pattern worth reporting. I was moved by this. I said so. He said he would do anything for me, that watching me struggle was the hardest thing he had encountered in decades, that he was going to make sure we got to the bottom of it. He used the word we. I remember that specifically. We. As though my health were a shared project, a problem we were solving together, a difficulty that belonged to both of us. He came with me to the next 3 appointments. He sat beside me and answered the doctor's questions about my symptoms with the careful precision of someone who had been paying close attention. He corrected me gently when I misremembered a date or understated a symptom. He provided the notebook when the doctor asked if there was a documented pattern. The doctor thanked him. He was the most attentive husband in the world. Thomas died in February. And within 3 months of his death, without any change in my diet or my supplements or my routine, the symptoms began to lift. I noticed it first with the words. A morning in May when I reached for a word and it was simply there, the way it had always been before, without the gap, without the searching. I stood in the kitchen and said the word aloud to no one, just said it, the ordinary word for the ordinary thing, and felt something I couldn't immediately identify. I identified it later as relief so profound it frightened me. Through the summer the fatigue receded. Not all at once. Gradually, in the way of something that has been present so long its absence feels unfamiliar. I slept less and woke more rested. The afternoon heaviness lifted. The room did not tilt. By September I was functioning with a clarity I hadn't experienced in 2 years. I told my doctor at my regular checkup. She listened carefully. She ordered comprehensive blood work, more comprehensive than previous panels, she said, because she wanted a full picture. She called me back in 3 days. She said she needed me to come in. Dr. Marian Chen had been my physician for 11 years. She was in her mid-50s, precise and warm in equal measure, the kind of doctor who made you feel that your appointment was the only appointment in her day regardless of how full her schedule was. I had always trusted her instinctively, which is not something I say about everyone, and which, given the past 16 months of my life, I had become considerably more careful about saying. She met me at the door of her office rather than having the receptionist call me back. That was the first indication that whatever she was about to tell me was not routine. She closed the door. She sat across from me rather than behind her desk, which was the second indication. "I want to show you something," she said. She turned the monitor so I could see the screen. A column of numbers, a reference range beside each one, and one line highlighted in a color that meant outside normal parameters. She pointed at the highlighted line. "This compound," she said carefully, "does not occur naturally in the human body at any level. What we are seeing in your results indicates that it has been present in your system over an extended period. The current level is low, consistent with exposure that has ceased, but the metabolic markers tell us it was significantly higher at some point in the recent past." I looked at the screen. "What is it?" I said. She told me the name. A compound I had never heard of, a technical sequence of syllables that meant nothing to me outside of the context she was about to provide. "It belongs to a class of substances," she said carefully, "that in low doses over extended periods can produce symptoms including cognitive disruption, word retrieval difficulties, concentration problems, fatigue that is disproportionate to activity level, episodic balance disturbance, and disrupted sleep architecture that results in unrefreshed waking." I looked at her. "My symptoms," I said. "Yes. For the past 2 years. Based on the metabolic markers, the exposure appears to have begun approximately 24 to 28 months ago," she said. "And based on the current levels, which are low and declining, it appears to have ceased approximately 14 to 16 months ago." 14 to 16 months ago. Thomas had died 15 months ago. I sat in Dr. Chen's office and did the arithmetic that she was clearly doing alongside me, and did not speak for a long time. "Eleanor," she said. Her voice was careful and very gentle. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as completely as you can." "All right," I said. "During the period when your symptoms were at their most severe, the fatigue, the word retrieval, the balance issues, were you taking any supplements or medications that someone else had provided or prepared for you?" I thought about the supplements on my bathroom counter. The ones Thomas had researched and purchased and placed there with the quiet efficiency of a man who had identified a problem and addressed it before I had fully registered that the problem existed. "Yes," I said. "Can you describe them?" I described them. The iron supplements that had not improved my iron levels. The vitamin D that Thomas had said was important for women my age. The magnesium he had added later, saying he had read it helped with sleep quality. Dr. Chen was writing. "Are any of these supplements still in your home?" "I stopped taking them after Thomas died," I said. "I don't know if they're still there." "I need you to find them," she said. "Don't open them. Don't handle them more than necessary. Put them in a sealed bag and bring them to me." "Can you do that today?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded to me like someone else's voice. Calm and functional in the particular way of a woman who has learned over the past 16 months to treat unbearable information as data. "I'm going to refer you to a toxicologist," Dr. Chen said. "And Eleanor," she paused. "I'm going to need to file a report." "With whom?" The medical examiner's office, initially. Given the circumstances, your husband's recent death, the timeline of your exposure, this information may be relevant to other investigations. She looked at me directly. Are you currently working with an attorney? Yes, I said. Call her today. Before you go home for the supplements. Tell her what I've told you and ask her how she wants to proceed. I stood up. My legs worked. I noted this with something approaching gratitude. Dr. Chin, I said. In your professional opinion, the level of exposure, the duration, the specific compound, does this represent an attempt to cause serious harm? She held my gaze for a moment. In my professional opinion, she said carefully, the exposure was deliberate, sustained, and calibrated to produce specific effects without causing acute crisis. Someone with knowledge of this compound and its effects administered it in amounts designed to be debilitating without being immediately dangerous. A pause. Whether that represents an attempt to cause serious harm depends on what the intended outcome was. I thought about the papers I had signed without reading. The estate restructuring. The documents Thomas had translated with such patient clarity while I struggled to concentrate, while words failed me, while the room occasionally tilted on its axis. I thought about the word he had used. We. As though my decline were a shared problem rather than a managed condition. I think I understand what the intended outcome was, I said. Dr. Chen said nothing. She didn't need to. I called Patricia from the parking lot. She listened without interrupting, which was her habit with information that required immediate action. She processed while I spoke, and by the time I finished she had already organized what came next. Don't go home alone, she said. I'm sending someone to meet you there. We'll retrieve the supplements together and establish chain of custody before they go to the toxicologist. Do not touch them with your bare hands. All right. Eleanor. A pause. This changes the nature of several ongoing investigations significantly. I know. It also raises questions about Thomas's death that we haven't previously had grounds to raise. I sat in my car in the parking lot of Dr. Chen's office and looked at the steering wheel. His heart, I said. The cardiac arrest, Patricia said carefully. The closed casket. The condition he was found in, which we were told was related to the time elapsed before discovery. Another pause. If Thomas was administering a compound to you with knowledge of its effects, if this was deliberate and sustained, then the question of whether his own death was what it appeared to be becomes considerably more complex. I had not yet allowed myself to form that thought completely. Patricia had just formed it for me, in the precise, careful language of a lawyer who says the thing that needs to be said. Are you suggesting someone killed him? I said. I'm suggesting, Patricia said, that we now have grounds to ask questions we didn't previously have grounds to ask. The investigators will need to know about this today. The medical examiner's report will need to be reviewed in light of this new information. A pause. I need you to be prepared for the possibility that what we find may be different from what we expect. I've been preparing for that for 16 months, I said. I know, she said. Come to the office after you retrieve the supplements. I'll have everyone assembled. The supplements were still in the bathroom cabinet. 3 bottles. Thomas's handwriting on a small piece of tape, on each one iron, vitamin D, magnesium, in the precise labeling of a man who organized everything. I stood in the bathroom doorway and looked at them for a moment. Then I put on the kitchen gloves I had brought for the purpose and placed each bottle carefully into a separate Ziploc bag. I stood at the bathroom counter and looked at my own face in the mirror. 62 years old. Silver brown hair. The face of a woman who had spent 2 years being slowly made less than herself by a man she had trusted completely, and who had attributed the diminishment to age, to grief, to the natural adjustments of a body entering its later decades. I had apologized to my book club for being foggy. I had apologized to Lucas for forgetting things he had told me. I had apologized to myself, privately, for the decline I had assumed was mine. It had not been mine. It had been manufactured. I picked up the 3 bags. I left the house. Patricia had assembled the full team by the time I arrived. Sandra was there with her laptop. The federal investigator assigned to the financial fraud case, a measured woman named Agent Torres who had been working the case for 8 months and who received the new information with the particular stillness of someone adding a significant piece to a picture they have been building for a long time. A toxicologist Patricia had worked with previously, a quiet man named Dr. Reeves who took the 3 bags from me with gloved hands and labeled them immediately, and said he could have preliminary results within 48 hours. And a new person I had not met. A woman in her 40s, dark hair, the careful professional neutrality of someone whose work required them to maintain it consistently. Patricia introduced her as Dr. Anita Marsh from the medical examiner's office. "I've been asked to review the circumstances of your husband's death," Dr. Marsh said. "In light of the new information, the original findings may warrant re-examination." "What does that mean specifically?" I said. "The original cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. The determination was made based on the condition of the body at discovery and the available medical history." She paused. "We now have information suggesting your husband was administering a compound to you with knowledge of its physiological effects. If he had access to that compound, the question of what else he may have had access to becomes relevant." "You're looking at whether someone poisoned him," I said. "We're looking at whether the original determination was complete," she said carefully. "That's a different question." I appreciated the precision of it. "Who would have had motive?" Agent Torres said. "Not to me specifically. To the room." The room was quiet for a moment. Then I thought about the emails between Thomas and Lindsay. The arrangement Thomas had designed for after his death. The funds that were supposed to transfer on a schedule once enough time had passed. I thought about Lindsay, who had known for 19 months. Who had sat at my dinner table. Who had stood at the funeral with her hand in Lucas's. I thought about what a woman might do if the plan she had agreed to participate in was taking too long. If the man at the center of it was preparing to disappear rather than die. If disappearance served his interests but not hers. "I think you should look at my daughter-in-law," I said. Agent Torres moved carefully. That was the word that kept returning to me as the investigation expanded over the following weeks. Careful. Everything that happened was done with a precision that precluded the kind of error that could compromise what came next. Warrants obtained before searches. Evidence documented before it was moved. Questions asked in sequences designed to establish facts before reaching conclusions. The toxicology results came back in 46 hours. The supplements contained the compound Dr. Chen had identified in my blood. Not at the labeled concentrations. The iron supplement, in particular, contained significantly less iron than the label indicated and a measurable quantity of the compound instead. The vitamin D bottle had been similarly altered. The magnesium was clean, either it had been added later and not yet modified, or it had been intended as cover, a legitimate supplement among the others. Dr. Reeves presented his findings in Patricia's conference room with the calm authority of a scientist who has done this before and understands that precision matters more than drama. The compound was introduced into the supplements after manufacturing, he said. The seal on the iron bottle had been opened and resealed. The vitamin D cap showed tool marks consistent with repeated opening. He looked at me. Someone with access to these bottles over an extended period was introducing the compound in quantities calibrated to produce specific effects. Someone with access to these bottles. Thomas had purchased them. Thomas had placed them on my bathroom counter. Thomas had refilled them when they ran low. I remembered this, a specific memory of Thomas bringing a new bottle from the cabinet under the sink when the bathroom bottle appeared to be empty, saying he had stocked up because he didn't want me to run out. He had stocked the cabinet under the sink. There are more bottles, I said. Sandra was already standing. The cabinet under the bathroom sink contained 4 additional bottles. They were collected the same afternoon under Agent Torres's supervision. 3 tested positive for the compound. 1 was untouched. The one that was untouched was the most recent purchase. The date on the receipt Thomas had kept, in the meticulous way he kept all receipts, was 11 months before his death. 11 months before his death, Thomas had purchased a supplement he had not yet modified, which meant the modification process was ongoing, which meant it was not a single act of contamination, but a sustained practice of periodic alteration, requiring regular access to the bottles and regular introduction of the compound in controlled amounts. Someone had been managing my decline the way you manage a project, with timelines and adjustments and periodic assessment of whether the current dosage was producing the desired results. I sat in Patricia's conference room and thought about the notebook Thomas had kept. The one with dates and symptoms. The one he had shown to Dr. Chen at my appointments. The one she had thanked him for. He had been tracking the effects. He had been monitoring the results of what he was doing to me and presenting the documentation as evidence of his concern. Agent Torres requested the notebook through Patricia the following morning. It was still in the study, in the drawer where Thomas had kept it. I retrieved it myself with gloves and handed it to the investigator. She paged through it for several minutes. He was detailed, she said finally. He was always detailed, I said. She nodded slowly. The notation in the book, dates, symptom descriptions, dosage references written in a shorthand I hadn't recognized as dosage references when I saw it, told a story that was now, in context, entirely legible. Thomas had been poisoning me systematically. Tracking the results, adjusting the amounts, managing the process with the same organized thoroughness he had brought to everything else in his hidden life. The question that remained was why. Agent Torres answered that question 3 weeks later. The answer was in the documents I had signed without reading. The estate restructuring papers from 18 months before Thomas's death. The ones he had explained with such patient clarity on an evening when I was particularly foggy, when the words were particularly elusive. When I had signed where he pointed without reading what I was signing because reading had become effortful in a way it had never been before. What I had signed, Patricia explained when Agent Torres laid out the complete picture, was a modification to our estate documents that established a medical power of attorney, transferable under specific conditions. One of which was documented cognitive decline over a sustained period. If I could be shown to have experienced significant cognitive decline, documented by a physician, supported by a record of symptoms, evidenced by a pattern established over time, the power of attorney would transfer to Thomas initially, and in the event of Thomas's death, to the person he had designated as successor. The person he had designated was Lindsay. Thomas had been poisoning me to create documented evidence of cognitive decline that would eventually transfer control of my estate to my daughter-in-law. He had been doing it while monitoring the results in a notebook he showed to my doctor as evidence of his concern. He had been doing it with Lindsay's knowledge, possibly with her active involvement in ensuring the supplements were maintained when Thomas was away. I sat in Patricia's conference room and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then I looked at Agent Torres. "How long before you have enough?" I said. "We have enough now," she said. "We've had enough for several days. I wanted to make sure you understood the complete picture before we moved." "Move," I said. She nodded. She picked up her phone. Lindsay was arrested on a Thursday morning. I was not there. I had not asked to be, and Patricia had not suggested it. There are moments in a story that belong to the law and not to the person the story happened to, and the moment of arrest was one of them. Agent Torres called me at 9:14 to confirm it had occurred without incident. Lindsay had been at home. She had not resisted. She had asked immediately for her attorney, which Agent Torres said was the response of someone who had been expecting the call for some time. Lucas called me 4 minutes later. He had been notified simultaneously, through a separate call from Agent Torres, who had insisted on making that call herself rather than allowing Lucas to hear it from me first. I had agreed with this decision. There are things a son needs to hear from a federal investigator rather than from his mother, because hearing them from his mother requires him to manage her feelings alongside his own. And Lucas had enough to manage. He called me because he needed to hear my voice. He didn't say that. He said he was calling to check on me, which was the same thing said differently. "I'm all right," I said. "Are you?" I considered the question honestly. "I'm functioning," I said. "Same as always." A pause. Then, quietly, "She was in our house, Mom. She held the kids. She sat at your table." "I know. She knew what he was doing to you, and he stopped." Started again. "Did she help him? Do they know yet if she actually helped him do it?" "They're working on that," I said. Agent Torres said we'll know more within the week. "If she helped him," he couldn't finish the sentence. "Lucas," I said. "One thing at a time." A long silence. "Okay," he said finally. "One thing at a time." The question of Lindsay's precise involvement took 11 days to establish. Agent Torres presented the findings in Patricia's conference room on a Friday afternoon, with the same methodical care she brought to everything. I had asked Lucas to be present. He sat beside me at the table with the particular stillness of a man who has decided in advance to hear whatever he is about to hear without reacting until he has heard all of it. The picture that emerged was this. Lindsay had known about the supplements from the beginning. Thomas had told her approximately 22 months before his death, 3 months after he had begun the poisoning, what he was doing and why. She had not initiated it. She had not sourced the compound. But she had known, and she had participated in the maintenance of it in one specific and documented way. On 4 occasions when Thomas had been away, 2 business trips and 2 weekend absences that I could now locate in the calendar Thomas had kept. Absences I had understood at the time as professional obligations. Lindsay had come to the house. She had a key. I had given it to her years ago with the uncomplicated generosity of a woman who considers her daughter-in-law family and wants her to feel welcome. She had used that key to access the bathroom cabinet and refresh the compound in the supplement bottles. Thomas had provided her with the compound and precise instructions. She had followed them. She had then left and continued sitting at my dinner table and bringing my grandchildren to visit and holding my hand at her father-in-law's funeral. I looked at the table in front of me while Agent Torres spoke. I thought about a specific afternoon the previous winter, a Saturday, when Lindsay had come by unannounced with the grandchildren while I was in the garden. She had let herself in. When I came inside, she was in the kitchen making tea, perfectly comfortable in my house, knowing where everything was. The children had been in the living room. She had handed me a cup and said she had noticed my supplements were running low and had put a new bottle in the bathroom. She had stood in my kitchen and handed me tea and told me she had refreshed the thing that was making me ill. She had looked me in the eyes while she said it. Lucas made a sound beside me that was not quite a word. I put my hand on his arm without looking at him. "What does she say?" I said to Agent Torres. In her own words. "What does she say about why?" Agent Torres looked at her notes. "She says Thomas told her you were already showing early signs of cognitive decline before the supplements began. That he was simply managing something that was going to happen anyway. That the estate arrangement was to protect you, not to harm you, to ensure that someone competent would be handling your affairs when you could no longer handle them yourself." I looked up. "He told her I was already declining," I said. "Yes." "And she believed him." Agent Torres met my eyes. "She says she believed him." I thought about that for a moment. About what it meant to be told by a charming, meticulous, thoroughly convincing man that his wife was already losing herself, already fading, already in need of management. About how easy it would be to believe that, if you trusted the man saying it. About how Thomas had spent 38 years becoming fluent in the language of trust and had used that fluency not only on me, but on everyone around him. "She was manipulated," I said. Agent Torres was careful. "That will be a matter for the court to evaluate." "I'm not saying she shouldn't be held accountable," I said. "I'm saying she was also lied to. Both things are true." Lucas looked at me. I looked back at him. "Both things are true," I said again, quietly, for him rather than for the room. He nodded slowly. "Working through it." The way Brooks' men worked through things quietly, internally, with a steadiness that sometimes looked like distance and wasn't. The question of Thomas's death was answered 6 weeks later. Dr. Marsh from the medical examiner's office requested an exhumation. I had known this was coming since the day Patricia had said the words "the original determination may warrant re-examination." I had not spoken about it publicly, not to Lucas, not to Ruth or Catherine or the others, not to Sophie, who called every 2 weeks from Portland with the consistent attentiveness of a woman still learning the shape of a relationship she had not expected to have. I had held it quietly, the way I had learned to hold things that were not yet resolved, present, acknowledged, set in the part of my understanding that was waiting rather than the part that was processing. The exhumation was conducted discreetly. Patricia had ensured this, understanding that whatever the results, the process itself was not something that needed to become public before the findings did. I was informed when it was complete. I was told that samples had been collected and that results would take 3 to 4 weeks. I waited. I gardened. I spoke to Ruth and Sophie. I had dinner with Lucas on 2 Sundays. I read 3 books I cannot now fully summarize, because my mind was not entirely present while I read them. On a Wednesday morning in what had become, improbably, the second spring since Thomas died, Dr. Marsh called. She spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I thanked her and set the phone down on the kitchen table and sat for a long time looking at the garden through the window. Thomas had been poisoned. Not with the same compound he had been giving me. Something different, faster, more acute, targeted at a cardiac system that was already compromised by the disease he had been managing privately for 9 years. Something that would present, in a body with documented cardiac history, as the natural progression of an existing condition. Something that, without specific testing that had not been performed at the time, would look exactly like what it had been recorded as. Cardiac arrest. Sudden. No warning. He had died the way he had arranged for me to be seen dying, gradually, documented, attributed to something that was already there. Someone had used his method against him. Agent Torres had not been idle during the 6 weeks of waiting. The compound used in Thomas's death was traceable. Not easily and not quickly, but traceable by the particular patience of an investigator who has been building a case for months and understands that thoroughness at each stage is what makes the final stage possible. It traced to a source that required a specific kind of access. Medical access. The kind available to someone who worked in a healthcare-adjacent field, who understood pharmaceutical compounds and their effects, who had been present in my house on at least 4 occasions, and who had a documented history of following Thomas's instructions precisely. Agent Torres came to Patricia's office on a Thursday morning. She sat across the table and looked at me directly. "Lindsay," I said, before she could begin. A pause. "Yes," Agent Torres said. The room was very quiet. I thought about the Sunday afternoon Lindsay had stood in my kitchen and handed me tea and told me she had refreshed my supplements. The ease of her. The complete ordinary comfort of a woman in a house she had been welcomed into, doing something she had decided needed to be done. I thought about the arrangement Thomas had made. The funds that were supposed to transfer. Lindsay's name on the successor power of attorney. The plan that had required Thomas to disappear or die and Eleanor to be demonstrably incapacitated. Thomas had planned to disappear. To Lisbon. March 22nd. And Lindsay had decided, at some point in the months before that date, that disappearance was not sufficient for her purposes. That a living Thomas in another country, under another name, was a liability. That the arrangement worked better, for her specifically, if Thomas was dead rather than absent. She had poisoned him with his own method. She had stood at the funeral in the front row and held Lucas's hand. She had come to my house 4 times afterward to maintain the compound in my supplements, continuing the plan as Thomas had designed it, simply with herself now as the sole beneficiary rather than one of 2. I looked at Agent Torres. "Does Lucas know?" I said. "Not yet," she said. "I wanted to tell you first." I closed my eyes for a moment. My son was going to learn that his wife had killed his father. That the woman he had loved and married and had children with and divorced in the wreckage of the past year had committed a murder that she had then stood alongside him to mourn. There was no way to make that information easier. There was no framing, no preparation, no careful choice of words that would reduce what it was going to cost him to know it. "I'll tell him," I said. "Not you. Me." Agent Torres looked at Patricia. Patricia nodded once. "All right," Agent Torres said. "We'll give you 2 hours." I called Lucas from the car in Patricia's parking lot. "Mom." His voice was careful and warm. "What's going on?" "I need you to come to my house," I said. "Now if possible." "And Lucas," I paused. Looked at the steering wheel. Found the words. "I need you to drive carefully. Take your time. Be safe on the road." A silence. "Mom," he said. "How bad is it?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "It is the last thing," I said. "After this there is nothing left to find. But it is the hardest thing." A long pause. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. "I'll be here," I said. I started the engine. Outside, the April morning continued in its indifferent way, traffic moving, birds doing whatever birds do in parking lots. The ordinary machinery of a world that does not pause for the weight of what is about to be said in a small house in Connecticut to a man who deserves far better than the family history he has been given. I drove home. I made coffee. I waited for my son. Lucas arrived in 38 minutes. I heard his car in the driveway before I saw it, the particular sound of his engine, which I had learned the way you learn the sounds of the people you love, automatically and without intending to. I was standing at the kitchen window when he came up the path. He was walking the way he walked when he was managing something internally, steady, deliberate, slightly faster than his normal pace. He came through the door without knocking. He had stopped knocking months ago, which I had understood as a form of closeness, of the particular comfort of a relationship that no longer required the formality of announcement. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Sit down," I said. He sat at the kitchen table. I set a cup of coffee in front of him that he did not touch. I sat across from him and I told him. I told him everything Agent Torres had told me, in the order she had told it to me, without softening and without embellishment, because Lucas had made clear in the months since the first discoveries that he wanted the truth in its actual shape rather than in a managed version, designed to reduce its impact. He had said this explicitly, once, on a Sunday evening when I had started to frame something carefully, and he had stopped me and said, "Mom, just tell me." So I told him. The compound in Thomas's body. The traces that did not match his cardiac history. The source that required medical access. The 4 visits Lindsay had made to my house. The timeline that placed her in possession of the relevant knowledge and the relevant means at the relevant time. Lucas listened without speaking. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, a bird was doing something in the garden that required a great deal of commentary. The clock on the wall kept time with the indifference it always brought to difficult moments. Lucas looked at his coffee cup. "She killed him," he said. "Yes. She killed my father, and then stood at his funeral." "Yes. And she kept coming to your house." "She kept." He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. "She was in this house. After. While she knew what she had done." "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "Was it wrong that he died?" I looked at him. "I don't mean," he pressed his hand flat on the table. "I mean, he was poisoning you. He had been poisoning you for 2 years. If she hadn't, if he had gotten to Lisbon, if he had disappeared, you would have kept declining. The compound would have kept building. The power of attorney would have transferred to her." He looked at me. "Would you have survived it? If he had gotten away?" I sat with the question. It was a question I had been sitting with since Dr. Marsh had called on that Wednesday morning. The particular moral complexity of a situation in which a murder had, incidentally, saved a life. In which the person killed had been in the process of doing something that would have resulted in a slower and less legally actionable harm to someone else. "I don't know," I said honestly. "The compound at the levels he was maintaining," Dr. Reeves said, extended exposure could produce cumulative neurological effects. Whether those would have been reversible at a later stage, whether the damage would have become permanent, I don't know. Lucas nodded slowly. "So she may have saved your life," he said. "By ending his." "That is one way to look at it," I said. "It is not the way the law looks at it." "No," he said. "I know." A pause. "I'm not saying she shouldn't be held accountable. I'm saying I don't know how to feel about any of this. I don't know which part to feel first." "You don't have to feel it in any particular order," I said. "It will come in whatever order it comes." He looked at me for a moment. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Stay so." He searched for the word. "Steady." "How do you stay steady through all of it?" I thought about that honestly. "I don't always," I said. "You see the hours I choose to show you. There are other hours." He nodded. We sat together for a while in the kitchen without talking. The bird in the garden had resolved whatever it was dealing with and moved on. The clock continued. Then Lucas said, "What happens now?" "Agent Torres will make the formal arrest," I said. "Today, I think." She was waiting for my call. Lucas closed his eyes briefly. "Opened them." "The kids," he said. "Yes," I said. "The children are going to need a great deal of care through what comes next. They are going to need you to be very present." "I know." He straightened in the chair. The straightening of a man organizing himself for what the next period required. I recognized it. I had done it myself many times in the past 16 months. "I'll be present," he said. "I know you will," I said. He stood. He came around the table and put his arms around me in the way he had not done since he was a teenager, fully, without the self-consciousness that had replaced that kind of embrace somewhere in his 20s. I held on to him for a moment and felt the particular solidness of a son who has come through something and is still standing. Then he stepped back. "I'm going to call Agent Torres," he said. "Tell her she can proceed." "All right," I said. He took out his phone and walked to the window. Outside, the April garden waited in its patient way. Lindsay was charged with first-degree murder on a Thursday afternoon. The formal charges listed in the indictment were precise and comprehensive, the product of months of careful investigation that left no gap the defense could reasonably exploit. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to aggravated assault, the legal characterization of her participation in the poisoning of my supplements, obstruction of justice. She had retained a different attorney from the one who had handled her consultation during the fraud investigation. This one was known, Patricia said, for taking cases that required creative defense strategies, which was a professional way of saying cases where the evidence was substantial and the only viable approach was to contest the framing rather than the facts. The defense strategy, as it emerged over the following weeks, was exactly what Agent Torres had anticipated and prepared for. Lindsay had not initiated the plan. She had been manipulated by a sophisticated and experienced deceiver who had told her his wife was already ill, who had convinced her that what he was doing was a form of management rather than harm, who had then, in Lindsay's account, threatened to implicate her in the financial fraud if she did not continue to cooperate. Thomas, the defense would argue, was the architect of everything. Lindsay was a victim of his manipulation the same as everyone else. There were elements of this that were true. There was also the compound in Thomas's body, and the evidence connecting its source to Lindsay, and the documented timeline that established she had administered it in the months before his death. The defense could not make those facts disappear. They could only argue about what Lindsay had believed when she acted on them. The trial took 11 days. I testified on the 4th day. I had testified before, in the federal proceedings related to Gerald Whitmore, in the civil depositions related to the asset recovery, and I had learned that testifying is less like telling a story and more like building a structure. One precise piece at a time, under conditions designed to test whether the structure holds. You answer what is asked. You do not elaborate beyond what is asked. You stay in the facts and you let the facts speak. I described the supplements, the symptoms, the 2 years of decline that I had attributed to age and had now understood differently. The Saturday afternoon when Lindsay had stood in my kitchen and told me she had refreshed the bottles. The specific quality of her ease in that moment. The particular comfort of a woman who has done this before and expects to do it again. The defense cross-examined me for 2 hours. They were competent. They suggested I might have noticed something unusual about the supplements if I had paid closer attention. They noted that I had signed documents without reading them. They implied, carefully and without saying it directly, that a woman of my age experiencing cognitive symptoms might not be the most reliable narrator of her own history. I answered everything calmly and precisely. At one point the defense attorney asked whether I believed Lindsay had genuinely cared about me at some point before all of this began. Before Thomas had brought her into his plans. I thought about it. Yes, I said. I believe she did. I also believe that caring about someone and harming them are not mutually exclusive. People do both simultaneously more often than anyone wants to acknowledge. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. The defense moved on. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I did not attend the verdict. I was at home, in the garden, doing the slow, careful work of preparing the beds for what would come next. Patricia called when the verdict was in. I set down the trowel and answered, "Guilty on all counts." I stood in the garden with the phone in my hand and looked at the sky over the back fence, which was the particular blue of a late spring afternoon, the kind of blue that commits to nothing and contains everything. "Thank you," I said to Patricia. "The sentencing is in 6 weeks," she said. "You don't have to be present for that either if you'd prefer." "I'll decide closer to the time," I said. I set the phone down on the garden wall. I picked up the trowel. I went back to work. The sentencing was on a Tuesday morning in June. I went. Not to watch Lindsay receive a number of years that would convert her actions into something the law could manage and quantify. Not for satisfaction or closure or any of the other words that get assigned to these moments as though they are simple rather than deeply, stubbornly complicated. I went because I had been in that courtroom for 11 days, and I had earned the right to be present at the end of it. Because the story had happened to me, and I was not willing to receive the conclusion of it secondhand through a phone call in my garden, however peaceful that garden had become. The judge spoke for 20 minutes before the sentence. She addressed the particular nature of the crime, the sustained intimate deception, the exploitation of a family relationship, the specific cruelty of a woman who had poisoned her father-in-law while maintaining the appearance of a devoted daughter-in-law, who had then continued to care for her mother-in-law's slow poisoning while mourning the man she had killed. She used the word calculated several times. She used the word betrayal. She noted the impact on Lucas and on the grandchildren, who had lost a father and a grandfather, and now faced the loss of a mother and grandmother within the space of 18 months. Then she stated the sentence. 32 years. Eligibility for parole review after 22. Lindsay was 51 years old. The math of it settled into the room. I did not feel triumph. I had stopped expecting to feel triumph at these moments, and had stopped being surprised when I didn't. What I felt was the particular finality of a chapter that has ended, not cleanly, not without cost, but completely. Fully. In a way that the next chapter would not have to accommodate or work around. I gathered my coat. I stood. Patricia was beside me, and we walked out of the courtroom together into a June morning that was warm and bright and entirely indifferent to everything that had just occurred inside. On the steps Patricia said, "It's done." "Yes," I said. "Most of it." She looked at me. "What's left?" she said. I thought about the flight I had booked to Lisbon. 3 weeks away. 10 days. A hotel near the waterfront that Catherine had recommended. The early morning light she had described as unlike anything I have seen anywhere. "Living," I said. "That part is left." Patricia looked at me for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in 16 months of difficult mornings in conference rooms and courtrooms and parking lots. She smiled. "Good," she said. "Go do that. I am writing this from Lisbon. Not from the hotel near the waterfront, though I stayed there for the first 3 nights and Catherine was right about everything she said, the light, the particular quality of the mornings, the way the city reveals itself differently at each hour, as though it has decided to be generous with whoever is paying attention. I am writing this from a small cafe on a steep street in Alfama, the oldest neighborhood, where the buildings are tiled in blue and white, and the sound of fado comes through open windows in the evenings like something that has been waiting there for centuries. I have been here for 6 days. I have 4 more. I did not expect to feel what I feel here. I expected relief. I expected the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been through something very long and very difficult, and has arrived, finally, at a place where she is allowed to stop. I expected quiet. What I feel instead is awake. Not in the caffeinated, anxious way of someone who has been sleeping poorly and is compensating. In the deeper way. The way of a woman who spent 2 years being made less than herself and has spent 16 months recovering herself and has arrived on a steep street in a city she has never seen before, at the discovery that what was recovered is more than what was lost. I order my coffee in Portuguese. I am learning imperfectly, and the woman behind the counter corrects me with the matter-of-fact kindness of someone who has corrected tourists her entire life and considers it simply part of the work. I thank her in Portuguese. She nods. We understand each other. Catherine came for dinner on my 3rd evening. She lives 20 minutes from the waterfront in an apartment she has made entirely her own, plants on every surface, a collection of blue and white tiles she has been acquiring from weekend markets, a view of the river from the kitchen window that she says she will never take for granted, because she knows what it cost to get there. We sat at her kitchen table and ate the food she had cooked and drank the wine she had chosen, and talked for 3 hours in the easy particular way of 2 women who know each other's full story and therefore require no explanation for anything. She asked me how I felt now that it was finished. I told her what I had told Patricia on the courthouse steps. Living. That part is left. She raised her glass. We drank to that. Lucas called yesterday morning. It was evening his time, Connecticut time, and he had the children with him. I could hear them in the background, the familiar sound of their particular energies filling a room. He sounded different on the phone lately. Not lighter exactly. More present. As though having reached the bottom of the worst possible version of his family story, he had decided with deliberate intention to be entirely where he was rather than somewhere adjacent to it. He said Sophie was coming for the 4th of July, that they were planning to take the children to the beach, that Sophie had identified a landscape project near his neighborhood that she was consulting on, and would be in Connecticut for most of the summer. He said this with a careful happiness that I recognized as the happiness of a man who has lost more than he expected and is finding, in the aftermath, things he did not expect to find. A sister who knows good bones when she sees them. Children who call her Sophie and ask what she brought from Portland. A life that is smaller than the one he believed he was building and more honest than that one ever was. I told him to take photographs at the beach. He said he would. He asked how Lisbon was, and I described the cafe and the fado and the light, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Good, Mom. That's really good." "It is," I told him. "It really is. I have been thinking, in the mornings here when the light comes through the cafe window and the city is still in the process of deciding what kind of day it intends to be. about what I want to say to anyone watching this who is somewhere inside their own version of what I have been through. Not the specific version. Everyone's version is different in its details, even when the essential shape is the same: the trust that was used against you, the discovery that reorganized everything, the long, slow work of understanding what was real and what was constructed and what, despite everything, remains. Here is what I know. You will not emerge from it unchanged. Do not wait to emerge unchanged. That is not what emerges. What emerges is a version of you that has been tested in ways you did not ask for and did not deserve, and that has, through the testing, become acquainted with a strength you did not know you had because you had not previously needed it. The strength was always there. It was simply waiting for the moment it was needed. I am 62 years old. I was poisoned by my husband for 2 years. I discovered, in the 16 months since his death, that the man I loved for 38 years had been living a life alongside mine, that I had no knowledge of 4 other women, a false identity, a daughter in Portland, a financial fraud that stretched across decades. I watched my daughter-in-law be convicted of his murder in a courtroom where I had testified about what she had done to both of us. I am in Lisbon. I have 4 more days. I intend to use every one of them. And when I come home, to the garden that came back, to the son who is learning, to the half-daughter who knows good bones when she sees them, to the small quiet house that is entirely mine, I intend to continue the work of building a life that is constructed entirely on what is real. No constructed versions. No signed documents left unread. No supplements I have not chosen for myself from bottles I have not opened. Just the actual materials of an actual life. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever had to rebuild from materials you didn't expect to be working with. Tell me what you made from them. I read every single one. And I promise you, wherever you are in the rebuilding, what you are making is stronger than what came before. I know because I am making it too. Still here. Still building. That is the whole story.